In a world overflowing with distractions, we seek meaning. How do we transform ambition into something deeper, into true fulfillment? I'm Pepin, CEO of Course-Educa, and I've spent years helping businesses succeed by connecting their goals to something bigger. On the Meaningful podcast, we explore not just how to win in business, but how to grow as individuals. Through conversation with thought leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes, we uncover the stories that drive us towards something greater. Whether you're striving for success, seeking purpose, or just looking for the next steps in your journey, this podcast is your guide to navigating the intersection of ambition, growth, and meaning. So please join me and our incredible guests as we redefine what's possible in both business and life. Enjoy. If you want to understand people, stop asking how old they are, start asking what they value. Welcome to the Meaningful Podcast. I'm your host, Pepin. In today's episode, we're uncovering the blueprint behind human decision-making through three core ideas: the dataset of demographics, values as a new currency, and the rise of human-centric insights. My guest is David Allison, the world-leading authority on human value and the founder of the Valuegraphics project, a revolutionary global inventory of core human values backed by nearly 1 million surveys in 152 languages. In this episode, David explained why values, not age, gender, or income, are what truly drive human behavior. Together, we explore how business, institutions, and leaders can create meaningful connections by aligning with what people care about, not just who they appear to be. David's work has transformed giants like Google, PayPal, and Lululemon, and today it will show us how understanding values can transform your life too. If you enjoyed this discussion, please let the world know with a like, a small review, or even a quick share. Your support helps more people find meaningful content just like this. Let's begin. Mr. David Allison, welcome on the Meaningful Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm great. It's been a long time since someone's called me Mr. David Allison, but I'll take it.
Yeah, just the way it is. Some formality in this world that sometimes is necessary. It's lovely to see you. Obviously, you both have a personal and professional relationships, and what you're doing is definitely worth sharing. So I would love for you to kick us off with an introduction to Valuegraphics, please.
Valuegraphics, for anybody who hasn't heard the term before, sounds like demographics, and that's intentional. Demographics are a way of looking at a large group of people and saying, what do we know about these folks? How old are they? Age, gender, income, marital status, number of kids, and all that kind of stuff. Valuegraphics are a way of looking at a large group of people. But instead of looking at those external characteristics that we're all familiar with, we look at what's going on the inside. What's inside people's hearts? What are their values? How can we use those values to understand that group of people in a much more meaningful way than just age, income, gender, number of kids, what color is your skin, all of those kinds of things. What's going on the inside? That's where it really counts.
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting. This sort of shift towards sort of human-centric data is one that is very, very interesting. I want you to bring us back, David, to sort of this beginning of this journey for you. You always strike me as a very social, emotional type of profile, biologically speaking, and which I personally am a big fan of. Was it always in sort of, was it always a goal of yours, and I suppose even maybe a passion of yours to understand human beings, psychology? Where does that come from your perspective?
I don't know. It's an interesting question. I mean, most of my career was in advertising and marketing, and so that's mostly about understanding people. Right? But what's going to make these folks tick? Like, how do we get people to say yes to this product or that brand or this idea or whatever it might be? So I guess yes. It's always been there. I knew that's what I wanted to get into. If you talk to people in the advertising and marketing world, there's not many of them who said, this is what I wanted to do. It's one of those fields where people kind of land there after doing this or that or the other thing. And I mean, there's some people I'm sure who are intentional about it, but for me, it was intentional. It was like, this is what I want to do. So I guess that's the first clue that, yeah, understanding people was a big part of what drove me. And then the only other sort of clue I had, I suppose, early on was I was always interested in books on social and cultural anthropology. Like, why do groups of people do things? What makes a group of people a group? I remember reading books about this when I was in high school about, different music movements, but it wasn't the music that I was interested in. It was the tribe that was forming around a particular kind of music. So
interesting.
So I guess the signals were there, but while I was living those, I wasn't going, oh, there's another signal. I only in retrospect am I being able to sit down and think about that. So yeah, I guess the evidence was there.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And you said something quite clever, which is if you want to influence people, you have to speak basically about their values, not income, age, or locations, which is a little bit, which is very interesting. But I think that what you're doing at Valuegraphic differs quite a bit from traditional marketing, basically a framework. Now, you come formerly from that world as well, so perhaps when you're thinking about what it is to basically do this shift of focus from a traditional perspective to value-based data, how does that typically come by from the people that you're able to help? And have you seen some of this, I suppose, a better interest in such a concept in the next few years?
Wow, there was a lot in that question. Let me try and unpack this. So go back to basics, I guess, on this. So what happens right now in the marketing advertising world is the first step, anybody who knows what they're doing, is you sit down and say, okay, we have a new assignment, we have a new client, we have a new product we want to launch, a new strategic initiative that our bosses said we have to get out the door, whatever it might be. And the first step is you sit down and say to yourself, who are we doing this for? Like, who are the people we're trying to impact and engage and motivate and inspire? And what do we know about them? So you start listing their demographics. And you go, well, they're men, they're 18, 24 years old. They earn this much money. They have a white collar. They're single, but they want to be like blah, 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 all that stuff. The other thing we do is we look at psychographics and say, what else do we know about them that's not demographics? How have they behaved in the past? How many times have they bought this product? What is their emotional state? What are they? What are their favorite brands? Like all these other kinds of things we know about them. So those are the two tools we've had so far. Let's talk about those tools. Demographics tell us a great deal about what people look like on the outside. And then we leap to conclusions and we say, okay, well, now that we know that 73% of our target audience is male, well, then what should we do? It should have something to do with sports because all men like sports, right? It's such a ridiculous assumption to say that because we can see some external characteristic that we understand who people are and what they're going to respond to on the inside.
Sure.
So that's one set of, it's still a useful tool, demographics. We have to put a fence around a group. I mean, I used to work for high-end real estate developers who were building large condominium developments in big giant cities. And we sell a penthouse condominium at the top of this tower. We know it's not going to go to a 17-year-old who works at the grocery store across the street. It's a $10 million penthouse. So there's some sort of reality around those demographics. But what we've been doing wrong is assuming that just because we know what people are, we also know who they are. And that's wrong. So let's use them for what they're good for. Put a fence around a group of people, describes them. That's cool. Psychographics, all the other stuff we know, that's kind of a record of the past because we know it, right? We wrote it down. So here's how they behave so far. Here's what their emotions have been. And what we're all trying to do in the marketing and advertising world. Absolutely 100% for sure. What we're all trying to do is to change what people do in the future. We want to get them to do something different. So if we're only using information from the past, that's like driving the car only looking in the rearview mirror. You know, you might get there eventually, but you're going to go in the ditch a few times and hit a telephone pole. So if we understand what people's values are, there's processes in our brain that reward us with dopamine when we make a decision that's aligned with our values. So we wake up every day, all of us, 9 billion of us around the world, running around all day long, just trying to find everything we can that aligns with our values. Every decision you make, that's how your brain does it. Which one aligns with our values? What sweater am I going to wear today? Who am I going to marry? What's my job going to be? What route am I going to take to work today? Am I going to go to a movie tomorrow? Every single thing you decide all day long is about which one aligns with our values. So that's how we decide into the future. So as marketers and advertisers, now that we have this data on our values, the values of a group of people, we can put demographics to describe them, put a fence around them, psychographics to see how they've behaved so far, and value graphics as a way to understand what we got to say and do to get them to do the next thing we want them to do. Now we're really set to go. We have a 3-legged stool instead of a 2-legged stool, which is pretty tippy.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, that's an extraordinary explanations. And obviously you conducted nearly a million surveys, basically already as part of Valuegraphics. So in 152 languages. Well, that's something that I find quite interesting. Tell me the difference between, obviously you're an English speaker. Do you speak any other languages, David?
I'm going to say no,
You're
because
gonna
then you're
say
going
no,
to
but I'm
say
sure you.
something in French, and I'm not going to be able to. So
That's okay. So basically, I suppose there's a team or a support system to do surveys in other languages, or what's typically the process there? Is it very similar to conducting them in a language that you formally know?
yeah, so let's just touch on a couple of those things there. So yeah, we've done 1 million surveys now. Good, we're cranking over 1 million now, and those surveys have been they go in our benchmark study, our benchmark database, and those have been conducted in 152 different languages because we're accurate in 180 countries around the world. So this is a global inventory of what
Nice.
our values are for 180 different countries. It's more accurate than you need for a PhD. If there's data geeks listening, it's a plus or minus 3.5% accuracy and 95% confidence. So this is rock solid stuff. We understand what everyone's shared values are all around the world. Now, the trick is we have to know which values to pull out of there when we're talking about selling coffee cups. So who's going to buy these particular coffee cups in this particular part of the world? Well, it's in there somewhere. We just don't know which ones apply. So we go and do another survey, a little tiny survey, talk to a couple thousand people who are interested in coffee cups in, let's say, Belgium. And we ask them a few things about their life. And that's enough. It becomes a wayfinding tool for us to go, oh, people who like coffee cups, when we look at what they told us, we can go into the database and go, oh, it's this and this, and it's these guys and it's that stuff. And so we know all this great stuff about people just like them. And that's the information that we work with. We go forward and say, listen, we've got this rich contextualized profile of who people are based on what we now have learned about people who want coffee cups in Belgium. And their information goes back into the data set. And we listen to what they have to say, but more importantly, what they're doing is helping us understand what data to pull out of this hundreds of millions of data points kind of swimming around in this big giant data pool. Did I even answer your question? What were you asking?
So I was just saying that I think you did actually. It was just a sort of a formality of the process when it comes down to sort of doing surveys in a language that obviously you don't understand.
Oh,
Is
yeah,
there a
yeah,
team
yeah.
involved with it and
Languages,
so
right.
on?
That started with languages. First, let me throw you my one French line. This has
Good.
nothing to do with what we're talking about, but in junior high school, I had a great French teacher, and she was all excited the first time she learned that I was going to France. So she said, okay, David, I have to teach you this one sentence so that you can just say this. It'll really help you while you're there. And so she taught me the sentence. I memorized the sentence. I got it down so well that it's gotten me into a lot of trouble. And here's why. Here's the sentence. Je ne parle pas très bien le français, mais si tu parles très lentement, je peux comprendre un peu. And you can see why that gets me into a lot of trouble, because it basically says, I don't really understand very much French unless you speak really, really slowly, but I do it so well that everybody goes, oh, of course you speak French. And off it comes. And I'm like, no, that's it. That's the whole thing. That's all I got.
That's too quick. That's too quick. That's too quick. Slow down. Yeah, right. No, but it's very interesting because, and there was this sort of amazing articles that you put out on LinkedIn, very considering the Canadian people. Obviously, you still live in BC, correct, David?
Yeah.
Yeah, and therefore, obviously, with everything's happening, there's sort of this, I suppose, back and forward tensions that I think you beautifully sort of reiterate basically what makes us Canadian. But the interesting thing you're doing, because this is a global database, which there is very few of those basically that are accessible this promptly and this I suppose usefully, is that you're able to compare those to a lot of other countries that you cite basically within that article as well. And that's where I think the magic happens, right? Because now you're able to see not only that we value, for example, family much more than the large majority of countries, which is quite interesting. You know, I didn't know that prior to reading that articles, but you're able to also basically being able to sort of formulate and makes conscious links between this concept to not only better understand yourself, but your place within the world, which I think that global perspective is sort of extraordinary. And talking about that global perspective, one book that was very interesting that you wrote was Breaking the Myth of Demographics and sort of why you don't think it matters anymore, which that's also very interesting. I'm wondering specifically for global brands, but feel free to expand that. Basically, that scope, 20 companies you're working on. What's typically the biggest mistake brands makes when they rely solely on demographic data instead of expanding their I suppose, their horizons and their segmentation and the intelligence around the data to make conscious decisions?
Wow. I'll start by answering your question because I think I've been failing at that as we've talked so far today.
You're doing great.
But demographically, companies tend to assume that if they have similar demographics in similar parts of their trading area, that the people inside those trading areas are going to be the same as each other. And just because you may have a consistent demographic appeal to, let's say, Gen Z, what you're saying to Gen Z to activate and inspire and motivate and engage them in one part of the world is going to be very, very different than another part of the world. Because you're using the wrong lenses. What's happening is in different parts of the world, people with exactly the same values are attracted to your product or service. And you're looking at them not with values, you're looking at demographics and going, well, these ones seem a little odd and these ones seem a little different than those ones, because you're looking at here's a great way to think about it. Here's a loaf of bread, right? And what we're doing is slicing the bread this way and going, 18 to 24-year-old man who earned this much money. Those are the slices I'm interested in. And we say that's our target audience. Instead, if you slice the bread this way and say, oh, there's a group of people of all demographics who have a set of values who are interested in my product, what you're going to find is that this is the way it's much more efficient and effective to be identifying people by going this way across those demographic profiles. And instead of limiting yourself and saying, I'm only interested in Gen Z, what you're going to find is the same things that are working for you for Gen Z, because it's not all Gen Z who are going to be interested in your product, some subgroup of Gen Z. And that subgroup are people who are driven by a certain set of values for whom you're providing values alignment and they're getting their dopamine fix. So taking that same set of values and saying, okay, let's break out of the shackles of demographic thinking and say, it doesn't have to be just Gen Z. What we want is other people who have that same set of values. You'll find that you actually have a target audience that's much broader. You're going to find that instead of that little loaf of bread, that one slice and that one part of that one slice, you've actually got a whole freaking baguette. You've got a whole large group like this. Why would you limit yourself? We've had so many clients come to us and say, our product is all about Gen Z, and we just want to understand why Gen Z is buying our product or loves our brand or whatever. And I always say, sure, we can do that for you, but why wouldn't we throw the doors open here a little bit? Do you not want money from baby boomers? Do you not want customers who are also millennials? They go, well, that's not the point. The point is like, well, it is kind of the point. So what we end up doing in many of those cases is we'll go out and do the Gen Z profiling that they've asked for and show them all the values of the people within that demographic cohort that they're interested in understanding and say, here's the buttons, the values, the buttons you need to push in order to move the needle in the right direction. Oh, and by the way, those same things are going to work for you over here and all these other segments. And then suddenly they're like, oh, okay, maybe we're not just about Gen Z. So demographically, the biggest mistake companies make is limiting themselves by thinking demographically. It's far more accurate, effective, and efficient to think about your audience based on what makes them yours, which is their values. And those values don't recognize how old you are. Values don't recognize how much money you have. Values go this way instead of this way.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very interesting. You and I had a conversation, I think it was mid 2024, and you were discussing the fact that values, to a certain extent, we talk a lot about sort of the blueprints of someone, right? The 0 to 7 phase, typically, Freud and so on. You had this very interesting thoughts, which I still remember, and I'd love to philosophize with you a little bit on this right now, is that you said that basically those values, once they are set in, basically the value that you most, I suppose, stand for, they might basically interchange within themselves if you would look at it sort of in a ranking system, if you will, but those values will follow you basically for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Tell me more, explain to me more in details into our audience, I suppose, why that is the case and just how important that is to understand.
Sure. So you get your values when you're in your late childhood, early adolescence. So for everybody, that period of time is It's a little bit different, but it's around that period of time. And sociologists refer to that period of human development as socialization. So whoever the most important and influential people are in your life at that moment in time, might be your parents. It might be just one parent. It might be a best friend's parent. It might be a religious figure, a teacher, a combination of all of the above. The most influential people in your life, you imprint their values, and that becomes your value set. And you're going to have those values for the rest of your life. You don't go back into a socialization period when you're in your 40s and suddenly get a new set of values. You get your values when you're young, and they're with you for the rest of your life. We're all operating on 10, 12, 15 values, and it's a standard curve. Like there's a few at the very top of our own personal values list that are hugely influential, and then it kind of comes down like this. And there's some down here that just not as influential, but it's that unique mix of values that makes us who we are and helps us figure out how we're going to live our lives and how we're going to, go through the daily rituals of being human. So those are yours for life. Now, they can move around inside that list. Let's say family is the most important thing in your life right now, but maybe back when you were 18, it wasn't the most important thing in your life, but you wouldn't have gone and started a family and become a family oriented person if you didn't have family as one of your values. It didn't just suddenly show up that family was an important thing to you. Like magically you graduate from college and suddenly like bing, oh, I think I'd like to have a family. It's been there all the time, but
Sure.
circumstances change. And so now that value suddenly becomes one of the ones that's most dominant in the way you're moving through the daily rituals of your life. Now, people sometimes have a hard time getting their head around this because they go, well, but people change all the time. Yeah, people change, but their change is always rooted in that same set of values. So let me give you a quick story. You think about COVID. We all went into lockdown during COVID. We had to change our behavior. We weren't allowed to see anybody. Now, let's say we'll go with family again. So let's say somebody went into that situation and family was the most important thing in their life. Well, they were that person who was on the phone and Zoom, teaching great Aunt Sally how to use Zoom so that she could stay in touch with her grandkids and, making sure your mom remembered to wear her mask. You were like freaking out about your family. But if family wasn't one of your values, you didn't start suddenly freaking out about your family. You were freaking about whatever one of your values was. So let's say another value like ambition. So you were that person who was always on Zoom with your boss saying, I hate it here. I wish I could be back in the office. And I finished that report a week early and I'm still working 12-hour days. And I want that promotion that we talked about before we had to go and start working from home. I can't wait to get back to the office. So you reacted in a way that was about your values and the other person reacted in the way that was about their values. And then COVID finishes. We all like, poof, tomorrow. We all suddenly start to go back to the way things were before. Your behaviors will change again. Your family-oriented person will leave poor Aunt Sally alone and not worry about people wearing their masks. And the ambition person's going to, chill and leave your boss alone and not be so freaked out. So your behaviors change radically all the time, but it's always based on the values that are triggering those behaviors. So it feels like our values are changing, but they're not. What's changing is our behaviors, our reactions to the environments around us. So what that means from a marketing perspective is that once you understand the values of a group of people who are your customers or your employees or your funders or donors or some stakeholder group of some sort, those values are going to be with them for the rest of their lives. So unlike demographic data, which changes all the time, you go to bed one night, you're a 25 to 36-year-old person, you wake up the next day, you're 37. So you're a whole new target audience just because you went to sleep for one night and suddenly had a birthday, or you get married and now you're not a single 27. You're like demographics are always changing, but those values are going to stay the same. So once you know the values of the people you're trying to engage and influence and motivate, regardless of what it is you're trying to get them to do, you have the secret sauce. You know what buttons you need to push to move the needle in the right direction for the rest of their lives. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. No, it is extraordinary. And we know that every single decision a human being makes is driven by values. And even consciously or subconsciously, actually, we call it meaning, basically. You call it values, very similar sort of concepts, actually the exact same concept, which is very interesting. But you also sort of segment, I suppose, identify 56 values. And I obviously don't want you to just cite them one by one here, but we will definitely link to research basically that you have on such a topic. But it's very interesting that when you understand the core human values, you're able to, like you said, understand the world. That's very much, and we've been knowing this ever since basically thousands of years. With people like Seneca, for example, saying that what will control your words control your world, and to a certain extent, your values will be a core deciding factor of the lives you're going to live. So it's such a cornerstone of life and something to not underestimate. Now, within this concept of changing, which I typically would much prefer to say that a person evolve than truly change, because like you said, to a certain extent, those values are there and will stick with them to the rest of their life. I'm very, very interested in, from all the millions, basically the millions surveys you did, and sort of your personal experience as well. I know that you're somebody that is very keen on psychology and observing people. Which value do you think have changed the most in recent years? Or I suppose, what global events have influenced them in the way that we now see the world, both culturally and politically speaking?
Well, there's actually, the answer to that question is none, because all of us have a set of values and they're not changing. So no matter what's going on around the world, around us, values aren't changing. The only time values change, well, there's two times. The what you're talking about though is how does like the values for populations shift over time. There's no question that people from the 1950s and people from today have a different set of values. We're different people today than we were a couple of generations ago. But that change is very, very slow, because you, Sam, got your values from the people who were around you and who were important during your socialization period. And then you're going to pass on your particular mix of those values. You'll be part of the next generation's, like your kids will end up having some of your values and some of the values from their mom and some of their values from best friend's mom, and then their kids. So one generation at a time, things are morphing slowly. And that's why from the 50s to today, or the 60s to the 90s, or whatever you want to compare, yes, there's some change in values. But they don't change just because of world events. What happens, what we think our values changing, is behaviors changing as a result of trying to keep those values in alignment. So suddenly, let's be crazy, there's a war. Suddenly you find yourself in the middle of a war. Well, your reaction to that war is going to be based on your values. You're not going to get a new value because there's a war. You're going to behave in an entirely different way because of this new set of circumstances that you find yourself in. So the answer to your question about what's changing over the course of time, we didn't survey people in the 1950s, so I can't tell you what their values were back then.
Sure,
but I can give you an example. What's a good way to kind of illustrate this part of our conversation? Let's talk about, you mentioned differences between parts of the world.
Yes.
Isn't really differences over the course of time, but differences in parts of the world. I'm not sure how many people listening today or watching us today are from Canada and from the United States, but we're neighbors.
About 80% of our audience.
Okay, cool. So Canada and the United States, we're neighbors, getting along pretty well for the longest time. And in the last few months, there's been some tension going on. And the Americans are kind of poking us with a stick right now and saying, all kinds of things that many Canadians, vast majority of Canadians, aren't happy with. So there's some tension here. It's worth examining these two kinds of people. Now, as Canadians, whenever we get off a plane somewhere in the United States, we know we're in the United States. There's just something about folks, like they're really similar, speak the same language, but we know we're not in Canada anymore. And I know when my American friends come to Canada, they feel the same way. They're like, yeah, this doesn't quite. So there's definitely a difference between these two countries, right? Let me give you one little story to illustrate that. In Canada, our number one most important value is family, and it's followed by belonging. Now, in the United States, the number one most important value is belonging, and it's followed by family. So they're reversed.
Sure.
So from a Canadian perspective, we've been sitting here watching things going on in the United States for the last I don't know, 4 years, 8 years. You could go back maybe even a little further than that, since the anger seems to have sort of started to happen in that country. And we see all these stories about how Uncle Bob and Aunt Sally aren't invited to Thanksgiving dinner this year because they're on the wrong political team. They chose Team Red. We're all Team Blue, so they're not invited to my house for Thanksgiving this year.
Yes.
Family is less important than belonging. What team I belong to, that value of belonging, is more important than my family. I will divorce members of my family and not invite them to family gatherings because they're on the wrong team. They belong to the wrong team. Now, here in Canada, we watch that and we're like, wow, that's harsh. Family is way more important here than belonging is. So while we have our political differences, Uncle Bob and Aunt Sally still come to Thanksgiving. We just tell everybody, like, hey, don't talk about politics.
Exactly. Don't talk about politics.
Let's just not talk about that.
Yep.
So, I mean, we also see it in sports, right? I mean, we have sports teams here in Canada. Everybody's super excited about their own hockey team and who's winning and all that kind of stuff. In the States, it's an entirely different level. You belong to your team and you wear all the stuff and you go to tailgating parties and everything stops on Sunday afternoon because that's when football comes on. And there's like this belongingness around sports in the US that we have a small little version of that here in Canada. So in many ways, the values that we see in the data, you start stepping back and looking at them in different parts of the world and going, yeah, there it is. It kind of backs up and validates a lot of those hunches and suspicions we have when we travel, when we see people from other parts of the world. And even in Canada, just from one province to another, one coast to another, we feel differences. Now we can pinpoint them and say, if you're trying to talk to people in New Brunswick versus in British Columbia, there's different values at play. And you need to frame things up in a different way because they have a slightly different perspective on the world.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and we're both very avid traveler, David. But I have this sentiment as well when I go to the U.S. It's I feel, and again in an allied territory, I never felt threatened. Beautiful people, but you have intuitionally, sort of a sense that, hey, all right, this is a little bit different. All right, this interaction probably wouldn't happen in Canada. It's very subtle, but it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And again, you're talking about neighbors here. So imagine comparing basically us to, let's say, Nigeria or us to the United Emirates or whatever basically you might be able to find differences wise. And that's where I think what you have is something that is so special, especially from a global perspective. Like I said, I'm really, really want to sort of pick your brains on, I know that you work with the United Nations, right?
We've done projects with them. Yes.
Yeah. And I'm very, very interested, and I have my thoughts, but like I said, I'd love to obviously hear yours and sort of go more in depth within that. When you're working with a organization that is not only from the size, but also the credibility and the impact from a global perspective of the United Nations, I suppose, is it any different for them to use basically the value graphic to basically shape global campaigns as it is to basically work with, for example, a private company like Google or PayPal or even Lululemon, that are all companies that you guys are working with? Tell me more about if it is exactly the same or if there is any differences between sort of a private against a public entity.
Well, I mean, there's always scope and scale differences, right? When you're working with huge corporations, they tend to be interested in big, giant territories and comparing what's going on with their brand in one part of the world versus another part of the world. And when you're working locally, smaller companies tend to have a smaller geography. So they're interested in people in a smaller part of the world.
Smaller scale, yeah.
Not always true, though. I mean, there's a lot of small local companies who aren't geographically bound by a certain sales area, let's say, where their sales area stretches around the world. So in those cases, yeah, things are very, very similar. So no, it doesn't really matter one way or the other. I mean, the practicalities, forget about values for a moment, the practicalities of working with big, giant companies versus small companies. I mean, you've done both as well. You know that big companies can be there's just a lot of bureaucracy and a
Oh yeah.
lot of there's all kinds of layers of people who need to be bought in and who need to understand stuff and get sign off, and then 3 new vice presidents show up, and then we need to have another committee meeting. And whereas when you're working with a smaller group, it's like one person who's just like, let's do that, and it's over. There's some just tactical differences between large companies and small companies, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you're at a small company or a large company, for profit, not for profit, B2B, B2C. It doesn't matter, because we're all just trying to do exactly the same thing. All of us, no matter what your job is, we're all just trying to get some people to do something we want them to do.
Absolutely.
If you're in sales, marketing, human resources, fundraising, philanthropy, doing a raise for your new startup, everybody, we're all just trying to get some people to do something. And if that's all we're trying to do, everything else is just complexity that we like to throw on top of stuff. If we're all just trying to get some people to do something, then you need to understand what's going to make people do something. And the answer to that is whatever aligns with their values. So if you understand values, you understand people. And if you understand people, you understand everything. So it's a very, very simple line from values data to success. Understand values, you understand people, you understand everything.
Yeah. So even when you're working with the United Nations, for example, it's sort of the exact same process, but the scale basically differs, but the process, the use of it's very similar.
Yeah, absolutely. And within large organizations, they're not always doing everything large. Sometimes it's a very, very small little microscope they're using on a little project they're doing down here. There's a bazillion little projects going on, but the one you're working on is this big and it's over here in the corner. And so the size and the scale doesn't really matter all that much. No.
Okay, that's very interesting. And I was listening to Seth Godin actually, and he was talking about the fact that the future of branding isn't about targeting it, but it's about aligning yourself with what people cares about. Which we hear it in this narrative more and more, and I'm sure you would agree with this. There's this shift towards, again, human centric, or even value driven is a term that you now see all over the place. Is very interesting. One thing that is somewhat controversial, which I'd love to get your take on, is how do you position yourself towards AI? Let's just start with a broad question first. What's your overall opinion of AI within the marketing use?
Well, I think it's an amazing, terrific new tool that's shown up. I also think it's incredibly immature right now. We're maybe at kind of the dot matrix printer stage of its development. Like it's kind of rudimentary compared to what's going to happen with it over the next little while. So we better get used to it. But the problem that I find many organizations, many industries are having with this is that it's causing a lot of fear and anxiety. A lot of people are not all that comfy and wondering if it's going to, eat their lunch. Literally, is it going to take my job? And even those who feel secure in their jobs are like, oh, it's this thing. I don't understand it. It's scaring me. And I don't know if I like it or not. And so there's a lot of this fear and turmoil and anxiety around this thing. I got hired to do a keynote actually, and this kind of snapped it into perspective for me. This keynote was for the Institute of Internal Auditors. So these are people who their role inside large organizations is to help senior management teams understand where risk lies. Where are we doing things that we shouldn't be? And how do we minimize risk and exposure for this organization? That's essentially the role of an internal auditor. So what we spoke to them about and what they were keenly interested to understand is the risk that happens when you bring AI into a workplace. And the risk is that people will leave. People will shut down and stop working at their full capacity. It's going to impact people in a way that can be very costly to fix and be very detrimental to the success of the organization. So the answer is to understand what are the values of the people inside the organization. and talk to them about AI in a way that makes them go, oh, this aligns with my values. I get this. Let's embrace this, instead of what the heck is this big scary thing that's freaking me out and might take my job and I hate it, and running away and leaving and going somewhere else. So I'll give you one little thing that came out of that. Now, that was a really, really broad based study we did, because the Institute of Internal Auditors, as you can imagine, internal auditors work at all kinds of companies and public sector, private sector, all kinds of things. So it's a really broad finding, but it gives you an example of how the data works. So one of the things we found across all of the employee workforces that were represented by the folks who were at this conference was that they over-index on the value of personal growth. They want to be a better version of themselves in every way they can from one day to the next. Okay, so we know that to be true about these folks. And what we're trying to do, remember, we're all here trying to get some people to do something we want them to do. In this case, what we want them to do is to go, wow, AI is great. So we know that they'll say that if we can show them how AI is going to help them with their personal growth, help them with being a better version of themselves tomorrow than they are today. So one of the recommendations that I gave on stage for that particular keynote was, why not bring AI into your organizations initially as a pilot program in ways that benefit people personally? Why not bring AI in and give it to them as a tool they can use at work, or as even adult education courses? If the folks at work, some of them might be interested in understanding Japanese flower arranging. Cool, here's an AI-driven course for you on that. And maybe there's some folks in there who are interested in understanding how to be a better runner. Okay, cool. Here's how AI is going to help you with that. So since personal growth is a really important thing to these folks, show them how this thing can help them with that value. And now they're like, wow, I'm using AI. It's aligning with my values. This is making total sense. And then come at them and say, okay, cool. Here's how we're going to use it at work. Here's how it's going to help us with our growth here in the organization. And people are already open to it because we've shown them how it can align with their values. So that's not a step that you probably would have thought about. If you're thinking about how do I bring AI into the workplace and not freak everybody out, the first place you would go is not Japanese flower arranging courses. The first place you would go is, well, we've made a new tool and it, crunches the things and the status of the financial back end of the, something data from the accounting and whatever. That's just going to freak people out. Show them how it's about, in this case, for this group of people, show them how it's about personal growth. Now, if we did this study for another organization, it might be that it's a different value altogether that you need to focus on, but that's the one that worked in this particular piece of research.
Right. So it seems like we're coming back to a very central idea, actually, where you believe that AI and data-driven basically insights fit into this new paradigm. But again, if you must have value basically as a foundational, not only concept, but also implementations within this process to make sure that basically people understand that, hey, what you want them to do, which is in this case, not only but perhaps use AI, I suppose, to a certain extent, that is in accordance with their value, what they're trying to achieve, and not against it.
Absolutely. And then you can look at it in terms of the AI product itself. So here's an interesting thought. Large global multinationals right now are engaging with organizations to try and build AI tools. And one of the things they're trying to build are tools that help them share their IP across all of their offices. So let's say you're Corporation X, and you have offices in Beijing and New York and a bunch of other places in the world. The folks in Beijing, the studies, the work you've done, the IP you have there isn't necessarily always available to the folks in New York. And the stuff that you know in New York isn't always available to the stuff in Beijing, to the staff and the folks in Beijing. So with AI, suddenly all of your IP from around the world could be in a central repository where people can query in all your offices and access everything that the entire corporation knows. That's an amazing leap forward in terms of IP and sharing and knowledge transfer and all those kinds of things. But here's the thing. When you query that central database, whose values are being used to formulate the response? Is it the values of people in China or the values of people in New York? Or is it the values of people in Luxembourg? So if you add values as a filtering mechanism to the data sets, Well, then the answer is it can be the values of whoever's asking the question. So the folks in Beijing will hear an answer that aligns with their values. The folks in New York will hear an answer that aligns with their values. And better yet, if the folks in New York are interested in the IP through the eyes of their colleagues in Beijing, they'll be able to say, tell me how this would impact, or with this piece of information, this piece of IP, how's this going to land in China versus the EU versus Peru versus the African continent, or whatever it is you're talking about. So by using values as an addition to the large language models that we're training, we end up being able to add that humanity back into this very inhumane thing, which right now, I think that's one of the biggest challenges with it, is that it feels very much like a machine.
Robotic, yeah.
If it understood who we were, though, it wouldn't have to feel that way anymore. It could start to feel like it knows us, and it could behave in a way that's aligned with who we are. And in fact, we could put guardrails on it and say, don't do anything that's outside of these values, because these are what's important to the people in this part of the world, the people from this office, the people from that part of the world. So values could be an incredible addition to LLMs and to the way AI products and services are being developed.
I think that I 100% agree, and I believe that the next step within this, now that we have large LLM and we have basically model that is sort of extraordinary from a data standpoint, that personalization to humanization is the next phase. And whoever basically cracks that open and makes that correct will be billionaires for certainly from a company valuation standpoint. And that is incredibly, from not only a monetary standpoint, but from an impact standpoint, I'm a firm believer. I'm very bullish on AI. I think that will there be mistake made with AI? Absolutely. Will there be evil done with AI? Yes. That's a case of all technology and all innovation. We can debate that certainly. So being very bullish on it, specifically in the medical sector, that's a side conversation, but I think it's going to save lives. I'm very, very nothing is sure in this life, but I think all roads are sort of pointing towards that, and that is extraordinary. And I think that everybody should be enthusiastic, at least, towards it. But I do understand the concern. I think you actually went through the concern very well, which is the positioning of how we're basically talking about AI now is extremely, extremely, first of all, business oriented and very, very technically focused. Like you said, we are the largest LLM and have the most accurate data. Well, that's fantastic for technical team or research companies, maybe like yours.
Yeah.
But for the everyday, basically, people that's trying to use it to align with their lifestyle and, again, their values, that doesn't mean anything. That's actually quite scary, perhaps.
Well, and it's one of the things that's a problem with where we are in that part of our lives at the moment as humans on this planet, is the folks who are building LLMs and who are working with this amazing technology, they are a certain kind of person. And they think the tech is a freaking crazy ass amazing thing. And they're all about the tech. But humans also have this human-centric side to them. We have fears and worries and loves and hates and values and passions and all these things. And we don't have a lot of those people working in the AI world right now. And a lot of those perspectives in the world right now. So if AI is truly going to become a thing that can impact all of us, it needs to get more freaking human. It needs to understand who we are and not just what we want. And this database of ours, this global data set, is ideally been built in a way that's absolutely perfect to bridge that gap and bring our shared humanity into this technological tool, because what we've done is figure out a way to make our shared humanity into data. So it's got a foot in each canoe, right? It's got two canoes going down the river, and we got a foot in each canoe. I keep talking about this on podcasts and writing about it, and I've reached out to a bunch of folks who are working in the AI space, and they're all kind of like, oh, that's interesting, but not really useful, because they're the tech guys. They're like, who cares about that? What matters is, look how fast we can process this thing and we can make all this stuff happen. Like, okay, at some point, someone's going to come and knock on my door and go, hey, you've got a whole global data set of what everybody in the entire planet actually cares about. Can we use that? And I'd love to have that conversation with somebody at some point. I think it really can bridge these two kinds of people and come up with a thing that's better as a result.
Lovely. Well, we'll make it happen. We'll talk about that certainly. So that's very interesting, and I think that also is all encompassing within this rise of purpose-driven brands. I'm a true believer that, and I only been here for a very short amount of times, but I do read a lot and sort of want to understand basically past events, even if they're not guaranteed the future results, as my very interesting gentleman would say over and over, Peter Drucker. But I do believe that today's consumers now don't just buy what you have and what you do perhaps, but they also buy basically why you do it. And that's where basically that value piece is so intrinsic to I believe, this concept of purpose-driven brands. Now, when you're thinking about the current marketplace, some companies understand this very well. Some companies, basically, like you said, maybe have at this stage, or perhaps it's not in their wheelhouse, and therefore sort of overlook what one thing that could be sort of transformative for the companies. I'm really wondering if we could start from the sort of the opposite lines. Let's say that we have a company that is quite weak, or perhaps have a non-existent, basically, purpose from a narrative standpoint. How can they shift to be value aligned, basically model, and allow them to not only be consistent within their current objective of whatever basically they have for, quarter to quarter growth, for example, yet starting to understand not only why it is important, but put in actions basically within as fast as possible within this shift.
Yeah, you've brought up something that's very, very dangerous right now. Companies who are suddenly waking up and going, oh, damn it, everybody wants us to be purpose driven and led by our passion and values aligned and all this stuff. Okay, we better figure this out. And so they sit around and they talk about these things and they go, okay, this is what we stand for. We're all about these things. And they maybe have a quick little survey they throw out and they ask people, what's important to you? And people lie. Because if you ask people, you put 100 people in a room and say, we're trying to understand what your values are. Is family important? Who's going to say no? You look like a serial killer if you say, no, I hate my family. I don't care about my family, right? So you just lie when people ask you that stuff. So, we've managed to find a way to do our research that takes all of that out of it. So we know we have accurate values. But the risk for organizations who are trying to figure this out and who aren't doing it in an accurate way and are doing it with the best of intentions is that you end up with very inaccurate strategies, tactics, initiatives that can backfire in spectacularly terrible ways. People look at it and think you're values washing, like greenwashing, right? They think you're just like making stuff up to try and ride the wave of everybody trying. So I keep seeing articles about, today's younger employees in our organization are values driven. So that's why we've done this, this, and this. So you have no idea what their values. Good for you. You've identified that values driven is a big, important part for folks. But then you just like making stuff up about what those values are, or worse, you've asked them and they've all said environmentalism and health and well-being, because those are the safe answers that my boss will like me to say out loud. So you got to get more accurate about this. I mean, there's some spectacular examples of people getting this entirely wrong. I mean, we're all tired of hearing about this story, but it's a great way of illustrating what goes wrong. So a boardroom full of people somewhere sat around and said, this is at Bud Light, sat around and said, you know what? We should be supporting the trans community. And they did one little thing with Dylan Mulvaney,
Yes,
who's a trans activist. And she's got a big following. And they sent her, I think it was like 6 cans of Bud Light that had her picture on it or something like that.
yes.
Tiny little support for Dylan Mulvaney. Well, the audience for Bud Light lost their freaking minds. And we all know what happened, the story, right? The stock prices plunged and poor Dylan Mulvaney was ripped to shreds and like the whole thing blew up. Nobody set out to do that. They thought they were doing a good values-driven thing. They were trying to be good people in the world, and companies should be trying to be good people in the world. But what they did wrong was they didn't use data to understand which values would resonate with their stakeholder groups. Now, it may be that doing small things to help with childhood literacy projects would have been the right thing for Bud Light to do. And that leaving the trans and LGBTQ plus community on for someone else would have been the right move. But They just wanted to be part of what they saw as a wave of sentiment around. And they said, okay, let's go do that thing without understanding the values that were at play. Not every company needs to do everything. I'm a member of the LGBTQ plus community myself. So I'm all for companies supporting the LGBTQ plus world and doing whatever they can to help us and support us. But it's not right for everybody. Not everybody needs to do everything. So find the values that work for your customers, your employees, your donors, your funders, whoever it is you're concerned with, and lean into doing things that are correct based on the data for the values of the folks you're trying to engage and influence. Bud Light made a big mistake. They were trying. They weren't doing it maliciously. They weren't like, how can we make this agenda happen? No, they were my Mr. Burns fingers.
Yeah.
They were trying. But this is the danger. When you try without actually knowing what the facts are, when you say we want to be values driven and here's the values we chose, say, well, why those ones? Like, how does those align with the people that you're actually trying to engage and influence? So that's why every time I see another company come out and go, we're going to be values driven now, I'm like, oh my God, here we go. Let's see.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because even from a cultural standpoint, from an employee standpoint, like you said, there's not only a sort of a search for employees' values for obvious reasons, obviously making them more productive, increasing basically workplace cultures and employee engagements. That's all fantastic and sounds very, very good in sort of these board meetings, right? It's a very sort of trendy and even quite a witty actually from their perspective. So I definitely understand it, but then one thing that is so key basically to all of this, and we even have a Harvard business study on this that was saying that I think it was 74% of employees in the US that will take a small pay cuts if the company would basically reinvest in their self growth. That's very major. So there's this sort again of a tendency within younger people, which I definitely fit within this demographic, is that basically we tend to be sort of enlightened. Some people are very, very engaged within their self-worth, their self-growth for all sorts of diverse reasons. And that's all lovely. And I think it's something that we should definitely take care of, I suppose. But one thing that I want to sort of pick your brain about is, since that we agree that value again is a base layer, is a foundations for pretty much every aspect, not only of business but life as a whole. I'm really, really interested in your sort of ideas or opinions when it comes down to how would the shift happens within recruitment, within retentions, within productivity. Will we see a day where there's sort of this sort of the value committee or value department, just like we have a financial department, for example? Do you see sort of going to that extent from your perspective?
I often joke about how, since values drive everything that happens when it comes to getting people to do something we want them to do, and since everything inside an organization is about trying to get somebody to do something we want them to do, workforce issues, customer issues, investor issues, doesn't matter. It's all about getting people to do something we want them to do. I kind of joke that there should be a chief values officer. It should be somebody whose job is to make sure that we know what the values are that are in play for each of these groups, and has a department of folks who are, I don't know how you structure it, they're embedded in all the other functional departments inside an organization or something, but their job is to make sure that the values of the people we're trying to engage and influence and inspire are actually the values we're using when we put an initiative together and do something. You mentioned human resources and recruitment and engagement and all of those kinds of things. One of the things we measure with our data is a series of 3 metrics that we refer to as return on values. So ROV instead of ROI.
Okay.
And these are trust, engagement, and price. So on average, across all the different organizations and industries that we've profiled in the last 10 years, on average, if people see that their values and feel that their values are aligned with whatever we're talking about, my workplace, this product, whatever it is, on average, trust goes up 20%. On average, engagement goes up 40%. And on average, price, the willingness to pay, goes up 12%. Now,
okay.
Think about that. Let's think about that. We started talking about this from an internal engagement, employee workforce engagement perspective. So we're not asking them to pay anything, but that 12% stat is about, think about it more as like financial elasticity. So folks will, and this is what you were referencing in the stat that you saw in Harvard Business Review, is that folks will be happy with 12% less in compensation, financial compensation, if their values are in the workplace for them. If they come to work and feel like their values are aligned and this is all working for me, 12% is the number that they will, you don't need that you have that wiggle room around actual cash part of the financial reimbursement part of their package. So that's enormous. If you look at large organizations in a workforce, that people are willing to trade 12% of their salary for values alignment. Now you look at it from a consumer perspective and you imagine a company that makes, a few $100 million a year, and imagine being able to tack on an extra 12% just by understanding the values of the people that you're talking to and making sure they see their values reflected in the way you're talking to them. So the stuff pays for itself in spades. You go to the other ones I talked about, engagement and trust. In what workforce in the world do you not want engagement to go up? Of course you do. You want people to be more engaged. And in what workforce in the world do you want them to trust? Do you not want them to trust you more? So just by creating workplace culture and recruitment strategies and retention strategies and engagement strategies based on aligned values, you're going to see financial issues are going to start to make more sense for you. Your trust issues are going to go up, and your engagement issues your engagement will go up. So there's no downside to this. There's never a thing that can be bad ever in any situation about understanding what people care about. Why would you ever not want to know that?
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think that will play the biggest role actually in the evolutions of how we make decisions the next 10 years, is being very intentional towards that. Like I said, I was going all the way to a department. Maybe we'll just see a chief value officer. Maybe that could be a great starting point. But I think it could be something that is extremely major. And we don't just talk, we're both for the marketing, obviously, world. So we understand that from just that, I suppose, that lens. But I think that from a company specifically, from an internal perspective, I believe that there will be this concept applied to a very, very wild variety, if not all, basically companies that are within basically this Fortune 500 or Inc. 1000, whatever you want to call it. I've been seeing more and more. This is maybe sort of that first sort of starting point, sort of a chief joy officer on a couple of big companies, a chief, somebody that is basically that is sole purpose, which is a big one, is to understand basically the temperaments of people, the environments to a point where they can shape it in a way that they are more productive, emotionally speaking. So we're, again, sort of bridging that gap slowly but surely. And I think it's going to be a sort of a major role basically, and probably faster than you might expect, specifically as technology is going up. What I've seen, David, and I'm interested in your opinion on this as well, is the more we communicate with machines, the more we start to sound like them, which is, I think, very, very interesting. And I think that in order to not only pursue and preserve who we are as human beings, understanding that from a fundamental standpoint could be a great place of balance and perhaps harmonizing our use of technologies to stay basically valuable entities, to not devalue our words simply from the fact that the machine is way better at basically data segmenting, for example, much better than any human beings, but understanding that what we're good at should be honored and glorified for what makes human beings basically special. And within all of that, David, I'd love if you can tell me what's next for Valuegraphics. What are the new research that you're working on, and lead me towards sort of this vision statements of yours and your impact in the world.
Yeah. What's next is I need to start doing less. This maybe isn't the answer that people normally want to give at the end of a podcast, and where they're saying, "Oh, it's going to be like we're going to win a Nobel Peace Prize." Like, I want to do less. I kind of have two lines of work. I'm a keynote speaker and I write books, and that's where my passion is. I get up on stages in front of thousands of people, and I'm able to change the way they think about themselves and the people they're trying to impact with their work. That there's no feeling like that. That's the most amazing. And I'm modesty aside, I'm pretty good at it. And so that's where I want to spend my time. I'm turning 60 this year. So you start to, you'll see this when you hit my age. You start going, how do I really want to focus on the stuff that really cranks me up in the morning, that's most values aligned for me? So that means the running a research company and working with our research clients and providing insights around sales and marketing and employee engagement and public opinion and all of these different things that we do. That's a lot of time and effort, being the CEO of a big global research firm, a small global research firm. So I'm actively talking to a bunch of different organizations about how they could maybe take that over, or how that could become part of somebody else's work. I don't want to ever divorce myself from it, because that data fuels my keynote speaking and my books. Every time I get up to speak on a stage, I use the database to understand what I need to say to my audience. And I get up on stage and help them with whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. So what's next for me is to do less and then to do it better. And focus on the thing that I'm uniquely capable of doing. Someone else can run the research company. So that's the answer to that. And then you had a second part of your question. You said, tell me what's next, and wrap up by telling you.
Yeah, ramp up by telling me what Valuegraphic is currently working on. But I think you sort of settled this to a certain extent. I think those comments are very interesting. Let me tell you something. I think you look absolutely outstanding for nearly 60. So keep up doing whatever you're doing on that side.
Thank you.
And no, I mean it. I mean, it's actually quite impressive. And from that perspective, like I said, I really appreciate this actually. This sort of last comments about doing less. We have this sort of tendency as human beings that needing to do more and working harder is the answer to achieve your goals. But we start to come back to this sort of very same narrative of, what if we focus on what truly matters, right? This, whatever, the Pareto basically principle, if you'd like, to just basically say, let's us focus and master basically within this line, because we're going to get to a place where, again, especially with technology, the generalist role will be used so much, will be basically so overused from a technological standpoint, that I believe that actually the future is holds and perhaps possessed by the masters. And I think that you, David, from a communication standpoint and who you are as a being, can fit that category very well. So, Mr. David Allison, it was an absolute pleasure to share.
No, we don't get in that quickly. No.
All right, there you go.
No. There's one super important thing I need to say before we finish here. This is probably the most important thing I've said throughout the entire time we've been with each other. And it's a plea. It's a request for people who are listening. And it's an important concept for us all to grasp. In however the size is that you can do this, whether it's just about your own life or about your work inside a company or in a community or an industry or whatever, it's absolutely essential that we all start thinking about each other in a different way. Because right now, what we're doing, as we talked about at the beginning, is we're looking at people and saying demographically, who are these folks? Who are these people that we're trying to understand and engage and influence with our jobs? And again, it's every aspect of every organization is about engaging, understanding, and influencing people. So we're all doing this all the time. And we're using demographics to do it. And the problem with that is not only is it inaccurate, our data shows that people inside a demographic cohort are only about 10% similar. So you try and target Gen Zs, you're only going to be right about 10% of the time. It's a 90% fail baked in before you even do anything. So demographics don't work, but they're also reinforcing demographic stereotypes. Because when you sit down and say to yourself, well, gee, my target audience is 73% female, the only thing you can do with that is start using stereotypical ideas about women to try and figure out what you're going to do next. Or my audience is all Gen Z. Well, you're going to go to stereotypes about what Gen Z is all about, right? And use those. So those stereotypes become more and more pervasive. We reinforce them the longer we keep using demographics to look at each other. And those stereotypes, not only are they inaccurate, they're the fuel that keeps fires burning of racism and sexism and ageism and homophobia and ableism and classism, and all of these problems we're grappling with around the world every day are being propped up and fueled by our insistence on looking at each other based on demographics, on how old you are, in what gender you are and how much pigment is in your skin and whether you're gay or straight. So if we could just stop doing that, if we could use demographics for what they're good for, but stop thinking they actually tell us who people are on the inside, we can make a serious impact on ageism, sexism, racism, homophobia, all these demographically driven, demographic stereotype issues that are making the world not a very, very nice place for us. And it's easy to do. The first thing you have to do is just think about yourself as values driven. You say to yourself, you know what? I wake up every morning looking for more of my values. Just think about, that's the first, if that's all you do after listening to today's podcast, that's great. Because if you do that, you're going to be forcing yourself to look at everybody else in the world the same way and go, wait a minute, they're reacting that way because of their values. They're reacting that way because of their values. And if enough of us do that with our work and in our personal lives, we're going to find the things that bring us together. We're going to see that we're not that different from each other. We're going to find ways to make the world a better place. So if we change the way we look at ourselves, change the way we look at other people, we can change the world. And we really can.
Extraordinary. David, I usually ask my guests for last words of wisdom, but I think that we won't top that. Thank you for spending your time with us today on the Meaningful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who could benefit from it. And always remember, your story matters. Make it meaningful. We hope to see you next time.